Hi guys, we're going to do a vlog today about saddle fitting. My saddle fitter, Ninon's come through to have a check at Danny's saddle. At the last show, when I pulled the pads off, the one panel also came off completely, which isn't the major train smash. At the past, she had the panels stapled in, so we're going to stitch them in today. And then she's also going to double check that the saddle fits and that the flocking is nice and even. And yeah, so I've invited you guys along for the ride so that you can see what goes into saddle fitting and kind of what a saddle fitter looks at, and then afterwards what I want to feel for my saddle to be fitting. So the saddle of mine, I bought in Johannesburg and then moved down to Cape Town. And the saddle make uses staples, but they use industrial length staples which are quite long. And most saddles aren't done that way. Most saddles are stitched. So the problem that Ninon has when she put the saddle back together is she tried to staple it with the staples she had, but they weren't long enough to properly grip the whole saddle together. So what she's currently doing, it looks like she's desecrating my saddle, but she's creating holes so that she can stitch everything together. So that's just why it's taking a little bit of time. The one method isn't better than the other, it's just different.
The stitching also just, it's much stronger.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
It just takes a bit more work to get it.
yeah, it's a bit more effort. But
It's probably why they stapled it in the first place.
no, the stapling, if you've got the industrial machine, it's like in 10 minutes.
Okay.
So it's definitely to save on labor costs.
Yeah.
But yeah, stitching takes time and patience.
Yeah. So when you're fitting a saddle, there's actually so many aspects of it that either makes the saddle fit you and your horse or not. So you've got the angle at the shoulder, you've got the width through the gullet here, you've got the panels. So your panels need to be wide enough for your horse.
Or narrow enough.
Yeah. And they need to be long enough but not too long that you end up pushing over the last vertebrae that are attached to the rib cage.
They also need to be the correct shape.
Yeah.
We need to mold the horse's back, which
Yeah.
is very, very important, and that's where the tree shape comes hand in hand.
Okay.
Also needs to.
Yeah, because I mean, I remember you having a conversation with me about the difference. Like you were having problems because a lot of the trees you found for the one horse was like banana shaped, and you needed like a straighter. Yeah. And then I mean, those are just if you look at the horse. Then you have to look at the rider as well. I mean, if you've got a very long leg, you kind of need a slightly longer seat. But you can't have a seat that's so long that if you've got a long length and a tiny butt, that your butt floats around in your saddle.
You need an extended stirrup ball,
Yeah,
which very few saddle companies offer. Your flap length needs to be longer. Your knee rolls also, the position, you actually need adjustable knee rolls.
Yeah, yeah.
The most important thing is the rider's got to sit balanced.
Yeah.
If the rider's not balanced in the saddle, then the horse isn't going to be balanced, and it's just going to be
A nightmare.
Yeah, as we know so well.
Because I think, if you look at saddles at the moment, they've kind of gone from being made for men to being made for men and female.
Yes. Yeah. No, they're comfortable for both.
Yeah. But if you then have the extreme body types, like you've got these really tall skinny dressage riders, then they find saddles harder to fit. I think it's easier in Europe because
I think it's access to so much more. But
exactly.
in cases like that, like even then, they need like specifically very narrow twist. With very tall, skinny ladies. Extended stirrup bars, flap lengths plus extra 1-2 centimeters. So they are very difficult, and also your bigger riders and the horses with the short backs.
Yeah.
And that's when it starts getting expensive.
Yeah.
That's when you've got to look at customizing.
Yeah. I'm quite lucky. I'm an average built rider on
and Daniel's
average.
got a good length of back.
Yeah.
And he's got a nice wide, broad back. So his lovely wide panels work really well on him.
And he hasn't got a humongous wither.
No.
It's not long and sloping.
No.
But it's also not like pony round.
So
he's
got a really nice back to work with. And it helps that his mother is very balanced.
Yeah. His mother's worked really hard to be very balanced. Yeah, I think saddle fitting, I think a lot of people think it just needs to, you put it on, you flock the panel, and there you go. And I think people forget that there's so much more science to it.
To me, I've had so many cases where if it's comfortable for the rider, they don't care about the horse. And that to me is like, we've come a far way, but
not far enough.
No.
Yeah. Because I had the opposite problem before I bought this saddle. I bought a Pessoa dressage, and I think the saddle's really good if you're built correctly for it.
Yeah.
My problem with that saddle was it was a 17.5, and it had a big thigh roll, but in the wrong place for me.
Yeah.
So it ended up being a knee roll rather than a thigh roll.
Yeah.
And the flocking in that saddle was exceptionally finicky. Like I had to have it checked once a month because it just, the second I sat slightly squiff, it compressed on the one side, or so for me, even though it was a great saddle for Danny, it absolutely didn't work for me. So I think saddle fitting itself has become an art and a science.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's not easy. It's
especially for someone like you who goes and like you say, you've got a rider who goes, ooh, I like the saddle, and then it absolutely doesn't work for the horse, and there's no way you can make it work for the horse.
I've been lucky because I call a spade a spade. Generally those clients who can see full of nonsense, they're not going to change their mind. They move on to someone else who makes the saddle work. So I've been lucky in that sense, but it's shocking. Your top riders, so many, just all over. It's still a lot of educating. I mean, I had someone the other day that said channel with this BS. This wide channel story, it's nonsense, and it's not. It's
if you look at how a horse's spine is built, it makes absolute logical sense.
That's the main reason for kissing spine.
Exactly.
So and these are knowledgeable riders that still got this mentality. So I don't know. It's still got.
We'll get there.
Hopefully.
Just keep on educating.
Or change careers.
Okay, so what you guys just saw Ninon do is put the saddle on Jenny without any numbness, without my weight, without the stirrup irons and all of that on. And then she runs her hand underneath the paneling to feel if there's any points under the saddle that have got more pressure or less pressure. any points where the saddle isn't gently in contact with his back, or any points where it's bridging, so it's catching, so that another part of the saddle isn't on his back. So what she's going to do, she's going to add a little bit of flocking to the left side, which is not unnormal. It's how we kind of generally all do it, or when I ride. Danny is very flexible to the right and very stiff to the left. So the right side of his body tends to be shorter and the left side of his body tends to be longer, which means that I end up sitting with more weight on my left seat bone to try and get him to bend more around my left leg. In that process, because I'm putting more weight on my left seat bone, the saddle dumps down a little bit on the left, so whenever we reflock the saddle, we often have to reflock the left more than the right. And then at the moment, Danny's really coming up through the front end and really getting his abs working. So what then happens is, because he's pushing up against the saddle, he also compresses the flocking, which then compresses the flocking and makes the saddle tip forward, which then makes me sit forward instead of upright. So we're just going to fix those little bits. She's going to add some wool in, and then she's going to smooth it all out, and we're going to put it back on him to double check that the changes she's made has got the effect that we want.
So I use 100% pure wool flocking. The wool is a natural fiber, so it molds the saddle's panels beautifully to your horse's back. It's also less likely to go lumpy than your synthetic fibers, because it doesn't bunch up as much as your synthetic fibers do. And also your synthetic fibers are definitely not as breathable, which makes a massive difference to your horse's back. So yeah, wool's it's more expensive, but in the long run it's just so much better for your horse's well-being and to your saddle. Yeah.
And I remember when I was doing my self-fitting course with Siobhan, the one thing she said that I'll always remember is that you need to make sure your saddle is never lumpy, because by the time you realize your saddle is lumpy and you open it up, the leather remembers that it was lumpy. And so if you've got a lumpy saddle and you reflock it, you almost actually have to redo all the panels. Otherwise it just goes back to its state that it knows.
The original form.
And that's kind of why I've been so strict on myself.
So generally, like people like Mickey, who ride a lot and spend a lot of hours in the saddle, we reflocked the saddle last year, was it September? And now, as the months go by, we just literally add bits and bits more. And then as soon as it gets lumpy again, it might take a year, it might take a bit longer, then we start all over again. So your wool is more high maintenance, but it's so much better in the long run for your horse's back and also rider comfort. I've converted air panels to wool, and the riders have commented it's so much more comfortable for them now. So just imagine how much more comfortable it is for your horse.
Because for me, I know I need a saddle to be checked because I can't sit the trot. On the one hand, I'm very fortunate in that way, and on the other hand, I'm very unfortunate, because the second my saddle has got anything not great with it, and like you see now, it's very, very little that you're adding in. But I've been struggling to really, really sit him the last 2 weeks. It hasn't been a long-term problem, but the second the saddle's not 100% under his back, he doesn't move the way he should, and then I can't sit. So if you look at my saddle, it's got a logo on it. It's upside down currently. It says it is a 17 inch and it is a medium wide. If I read upside down correctly. Yes. So it started out with a medium wide gullet. You have changed the front end a little bit into a different colour gullet because Danny has just grown and grown and grown in his old age.
Yeah.
That's the other side though. This side here has got the
Serial number.
yeah. So you'll see also on the saddle it has a serial number in. Each saddle's got a unique serial number which helps you identify your saddle. Unfortunately, those serial numbers are very, very easy to change. So this saddle actually has a microchip in it, so that if, heaven forbid, my saddle does get stolen, then the microchip will be picked up by someone who's trying to sell the saddle or buy the saddle, and then that microchip comes back to me and it is proof of ownership. So all my tack has got serial numbers on and all my tack is insured, but the problem is that if your tack gets stolen and they change that serial number, then automatically it's officially not your saddle anymore, which is why I put the microchip in, because the microchip is then proof of ownership. The microchip hasn't got a GPS in it, so it's not a way to locate the saddle. I know there are some companies working on a system where you could have a little GPS microchip in the saddles. The problem with that is you need a battery pack, and the second you put a battery pack in there, you're messing up the flocking and the sitting of the saddle. So until they've got it a bit better, then I'll...
Yeah, they can put it maybe in the knee roll or somewhere.
Yeah. So
foam.
they are still working on technology like that. But yeah, we'll get there. This little tag here is a little tracker tag. It's got an app on your phone. So if my saddle does get stolen, I can just locate it on there. It goes to the nearest GPS tower.
Or if Danny runs off with her.
Yeah, no, if my horse disappears with my saddle, we can also find my horse. Alright guys, so now you've seen how and what goes into having a saddle fitted and checked. I have my saddle done every 3 to 6 months. It depends on how much I'm riding, and often I find that coming into spring and like just going into winter, they change shapes a little bit, often because the grazing changes and because the weather changes. So I think the big thing about saddles and most of your tack is to keep an eye on it. You know, if you're riding your horse every day and you feel something's not quite what it should be, I often find, especially for dressage riders, the first place you start is your saddles. And you know what, get the experts in, don't try and do it yourself. And trust the people. You know, if someone says to you, look, your saddle really isn't working anymore because you've had it on a young horse and now your horse is 10 years old and your horse has changed shape, trust them. So yeah, I have my saddle done every 3 to 6 months, generally like 4 months I find is our timeline. On different horses it's going to be different, and I also think with every saddle it's going to be different. And then I have my saddle reflocked completely, probably about once a year, once every year and a half. Again, I trust my saddle fit on this. You know, she's quite good at knowing when things get lumpy, and then we kind of make a plan and we find a date that works, and you know, you bite the bullet and you do it. So yeah, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you like what you see, click the like button, please subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends. Thanks very much.